lines, it doesn't sound right. It just doesn't sound right. It sounds thin or something, or too fiddly.
It all started with a hushed murmur in the backstage corridors of the Royal Albert Hall, a place steeped in musical reverence, where the air feels dense with echoes of past performances and the ghosts of greats who once commanded the stage. Eric Clapton, the legendary guitarist whose fingers helped shape the very identity of modern blues rock, had just walked off stage after a blistering emotional set. It wasn't just another concert. This particular night carried the heavy air of nostalgia and introspection. It marked the anniversary of his iconic unplugged performance, and anticipation for something unexpected hung in the air, like cigarette smoke in a dimly lit club. Before we start, smash the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. Backstage, surrounded by close friends, aging roadies, and a few hand-picked journalists from veteran publications, Clapton appeared animated in a way that seemed just slightly off-kilter. His comments that followed would send shockwaves rippling through the music industry. In a rare moment of unfiltered candor, perhaps spurred by the intimacy of the setting or simply the weariness of carrying decades of musical legacy, he named 5 musicians he openly admitted to hating. Not disliking, not simply not vibing with, hating. The word itself struck like a power chord in an otherwise acoustic moment. The room, reportedly filled with the faint clinking of tumblers and murmurs of laughter, went silent. Eric Clapton is not known for impulsive public statements. His life has often been marked by introspection, struggle, addiction, and redemption, with his music doing most of the talking. That made this rare outburst feel even more significant, like an old lion baring its teeth not out of bitterness, but out of some need to finally clear the air. When someone like Clapton speaks with such vehemence, especially about fellow artists, it invites attention not just for the gossip, but for what it reveals about the man behind the legend. He didn't preface it with diplomacy or cloak it in satire. There was no setup, no polite caveats, just names, each one dropping like a lead weight. Among them were figures as towering as himself, some still alive and touring, others forever immortalized by their discographies. The inclusion of some names stunned even the most jaded music journalists. These were not unknown industry figures or obscure session players. They were global names, celebrated across genres, often appearing on the same festival lineups or classic rock playlists. Some had even shared stages or interviews with Clapton. To hear him express outright animosity was like discovering your childhood heroes had quietly despised each other all along. First on the list, Jack White. That name alone set the tone. The White Stripes frontman has been a polarizing figure since his rise in the early 2000s. To many, he's a genius, a rock purist obsessed with analog gear and blues roots, not unlike Clapton himself. But to Clapton, apparently, White represents something deeper, perhaps an appropriation of blues aesthetics without what he sees as the proper reverence. Or maybe it's the showmanship, the way White embraces mythology and theatricality. There was something personal in Clapton's tone when he mentioned him, according to those present, something that went beyond musical taste. Next came Yngwie Malmsteen, technically brilliant, an icon in the neoclassical metal world, and practically worshipped in certain guitar circles. But Clapton's distaste, it seems, lay precisely in that technicality. Malmsteen's shredding, lightning-speed solos and grandiose performances are worlds apart from Clapton's restrained, soulful phrasing, rooted in emotion rather than sheer dexterity. Clapton has always been more about feel than flash. To him, perhaps Malmsteen represented a distortion of guitar's emotional core, a desecration of the instrument's ability to speak rather than shout. Then came the third name, Bono. That one landed like a thunderclap. The U2 frontman, known as much for his activism as his music, is a divisive figure in pop culture. Admired for his philanthropy, mocked for his sanctimony. Clapton's disdain here reportedly felt different. Less about music and more about persona. Clapton, for all his fame, has always seemed reluctant in the public eye, uncomfortable with political soapboxes. Bono, in contrast, seems to relish the global stage. Their philosophical differences about the role of musicians in society may have long simmered under the surface, but never before had Clapton made them so explicit. By the time he reached the fourth name, Ted Nugent, the room had shifted from stunned silence to tense attention. Nugent, the motor-mouthed conservative rocker known more in recent years for his political tirades than his riffs, has always been a lightning rod. Clapton, while having himself stumbled into controversial territory over the years, has largely shunned the sort of firebrand identity that Nugent seems to relish. The distaste here seemed more ideological than musical, perhaps Clapton seeing in Nugent a perversion of what rock and roll was supposed to represent. Rebellion is one thing, but reactionary extremism is another. The fifth and final name was the most surprising: Phil Collins. It was as if Clapton saved the most shocking revelation for last, leaving those around him bewildered. The two had collaborated in the past. Collins even played drums on some of Clapton's most personal work, including on the album Behind the Sun. To hear that their relationship had soured, or perhaps was never warm to begin with, shook many. The reasons weren't clearly outlined in the moment, but the mention felt loaded. Whether it stemmed from musical disagreements, personal friction, or something that happened behind closed doors, Clapton didn't elaborate. But the tone in his voice was reportedly the coldest when he spoke Collins's name. What made this moment so explosive wasn't just the names, it was the fact that Clapton, a figure so closely associated with restraint and private reflection, had chosen to go public, even semi-privately, with such declarations. It begged the question, why now? Was it age? Was it legacy? Was it the need to finally rid himself of the burdens he'd carried for decades? Musicians, especially those with careers spanning generations, inevitably form opinions, sometimes grudges. The industry is small, and egos, while dressed in velvet, are often bruised and battle-hardened. Clapton's moment of fury peeled back the curtain on a rarely seen dynamic. Not the glossy, reverent world of classic rock documentaries, but the raw, unedited edges of real relationships, real opinions, and real wounds. The implications were enormous, not just in terms of media headlines or trending hashtags, but in how it reoriented the public perception of these legends. For some fans, it prompted a re-examination of collaborative works. How did Clapton feel during that live set with Collins? Were his solos subtly expressing a frustration we never recognized? Did he ever listen to Vertigo or Stranglehold with a clenched jaw? It opened up a space for speculation and reinterpretation, as moments from the past took on new, darker shades. Beyond the intrigue, there was something inherently human in Clapton's confession. Hatred, in the context of someone like him, doesn't necessarily mean blind rage. It can mean disappointment, betrayal, a sense that the music he holds sacred has been twisted or commercialized or politicized in ways that offend not just his taste, but his identity as an artist. He didn't lash out to seek attention. In fact, most reports suggest he spoke as if among old friends, venting in a way that felt almost therapeutic. But of course, nothing stays private in the age of social media, especially not when a titan of Clapton's stature lets down his guard. There's also the question of genre loyalty. Clapton came from a generation where blues was more than music. It was a religion. He studied it, lived it, lost himself in it. To see it diluted, borrowed, rebranded, and sometimes distorted may have stirred in him a sense of guardianship. In that light, his animosity toward artists like Jack White and Yngwie Malmsteen may not just be stylistic, but protective, a refusal to accept reinterpretation when it veers too far from the sacred. His call-out of Bono, on the other hand, may speak to the growing divide between artists as musicians and artists as celebrities. Bono's activism, his role as a global mouthpiece, contrasts sharply with Clapton's more inward-looking path. Clapton's music has always been about personal pain, vulnerability, and emotional truth. Bono's often expands outward, grasping for universal justice and salvation. Both approaches have merit, but perhaps in Clapton's eyes, one feels more honest than the other. As for Ted Nugent, the clash is almost inevitable. The two represent diverging paths of aging rockers. One seeks solitude and reflection, the other thrives on provocation and sound bites. Their political alignments, while both having drawn criticism at times, come from vastly different emotional cores. Clapton, at his worst, has been called misguided or tone-deaf. Nugent, by contrast, is seen as willfully incendiary. That difference, however subtle, may mark the boundary of Clapton's tolerance. Phil Collins remains the greatest mystery of all in this list. The man who sang In the Air Tonight and helped usher in the drum sound of the 80s. The man who played on I Wish It Would Rain Down and supported Clapton during rough patches in the 80s. If there was tension, it was deeply buried until now. Perhaps it was professional. Maybe Clapton saw in Collins the mark of pop over substance. Or perhaps it was personal, something only they will ever truly understand. The betrayal implied in that final name drop suggests a wound that went far deeper than musical disagreements. In one sense, this moment was an earthquake. In another, it was the inevitable tectonic shift of a man reflecting on a lifetime in an unforgiving business. Clapton has spent his career avoiding tabloid drama, letting his Stratocaster do the speaking. But on this night, it was his voice, raw, exposed, and unrepentant, that rang loudest. And for those who heard it firsthand, it was unforgettable. If you like this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, leave your comments below and tell us, what are your thoughts on Eric Clapton naming 5 musicians he hates? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.